everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be canning dry beans. Have you ever thought of dry beans as a convenience food? Well, I hadn't. They were just an item that sat on the shelf we used as kids' crafts or bean bags. They were just never convenient to use unless I planned ahead, which sometimes wasn't something I did. So anyway, once I discovered how to can my own dry beans, it was a game changer. Now I have them ready on the shelf and ready for tacos, ready for nachos, salads, just anything I need beans for. I love having canned beans on the shelf. So today that's what we're gonna do. We've got small red beans, we've got some black beans, and we've got some pinto beans. I'm gonna do 3 jars of the red beans and the black beans and just 1 jar of the pinto beans. That's all I need to replenish my supply. So that's what we're gonna do today. All right, well, let's get going. So first, I've got we do have to do them in a pressure cooker. We can't do a hot water bath. They have to be pressure cooked. So you'll need your pressure cooker, and you'll also want to have a rack in the bottom of it. So make sure that you've got a rack. And this pressure cooker, I could actually do 2 stacks of jars, of just the pint jars, because it is large enough that I could stack the jars and be just fine. So let's put 2 to 3 inches of water in here and get it warming on the stove while we're working with our beans. While that's filling, I'm also going to put some water in my saucepan, and I'm going to put this just on a low heat on the stove because I'm going to put my jar lids in it. We need to make sure that the lids, the rubber rings on there are getting soft. So we're just going to put those in there also and keep those warm on our stove until we're ready to put them on the jars. I did put the lid on the pressure canner, but it's just on open position. It's not closed. It's just to keep the heat in. So next what we need to do is we need to rinse and wash our beans. And since we're doing 3 pints of beans, we're just going to use 1.5 cups of the dry beans. We put half a cup of dry beans per pint. If you're going to do quarts, you'll want to use 1 cup. So I'm going to pre-measure these. And what we're doing in this step is looking for those irregular beans or beans that float to the top. Those are not beans that we're going to want to can. Alright, so we're just going to rinse those. And there's just a half bean in here. I'm going to take that out. I don't have any that are floating, and I don't see any rocks. That's another thing that you'll want to check for also, is some rocks. They all look pretty good. All right, let's get those drained. Okay, and again, that's just half a cup of beans per jar. And I've already got my jars preheated. We do want preheated jars because we're going to be pouring boiling water into these. We don't want them to crack or to break or even just any hairline cracks, because then when they get in the pressure cooker under pressure, they're going to break. And I actually had that happen, and it's a stinky mess. The house smelled like beans, and I had to just keep going, and it was a mess to clean up. So you definitely want to not have that happen. So you want to preheat your jars, and you want to sterilize them anyway. All right. I buy my beans in bulk. I'm not used to using these little bags. I find it cheaper and just a little more convenient to have a bucket full of beans, and so that as soon as I need to replenish my shelves, then I've got beans just right there that I can go and grab. And again, we're looking for beans that are floating or for rocks or that just generally would not be the best quality to have in our canned beans. Okay, these all look good. I guess I do see a couple that are the half beans, and I think I'll just go ahead and take those out. I just want the best quality. Okay, and again, we're just gonna put half cup of beans in each of our jars. I know that there's some methods where you would pre-soak the beans before you put them in the jars. I have done that a couple of times and I come out with very mushy beans and it is not a good product. And so I have not done that method again because I don't want to waste the beans. I have a few extras, I'm just going to put them in here. It'll be fine. It just, I know it's for digestive reasons that people want their beans soaked first. I have not had any problems, nor family members have had problems with that. So the dry bean method is the method that works best for us. Now we're just going to do 1 jar of pinto beans. Again, there was no rocks or low quality beans in that group, so I'm just gonna put them in here. So now you can see we've got a half cup of the red beans, the black beans, and the pinto beans. Okay, now we're going to put some canning and pickling salt in our beans, and I've already done a couple of the jars, so I'll just finish up here. I am putting 1/4 teaspoon of salt in each jar. I know that some people put a ½ teaspoon, but we prefer just the 1/4 teaspoon. And I'm using the canning and pickling salt because it doesn't break down during the canning process like a table salt does, so that's why we're doing it that way. All right, our next step is to fill each jar with boiling water. We want to leave 1 inch head space, or there's the little line that's just right at the neck of the jar up to that point. So we're just gonna pour that boiling water in there. And you do want to make sure and leave that 1 inch head space, because if you don't, then the jars could boil over and that will make a mess in your canner. So this just wraps up the last of the boiling water to go in the jars. Okay, and just make sure you go around the inside of the jar. I just use a plastic knife, it works great. Just want to make sure and get any air bubbles that are trapped between the beans out of there before we put our jar lids on. Just a quick run around the edge. All right. And then I have a jar lifter. It works great. It's magnetic on one side, and we just put that on each jar here, or put the lid on each jar. And I hear the water in the canner simmering, so it's ready for us also, so that's fantastic. And then each jar lid or jar ring goes on, just finger tight. You may want a pot holder or something for the jars. They're pretty hot with that boiling water in there. Something else I just recently read, which I'm going to try today, is if you have hard water, put a little bit of vinegar in your canner and it will keep the jars from having that foggy glaze from the hard water on the jars when they're done being processed. I'm going to try that, and I think that's a great idea because I have had to wash my jars after they're done processing because the hard water has just clung to the outside. It hasn't affected the product whatsoever. It just doesn't create a pretty jar. So I'm going to try that little tip and trick today. So, okay, we're going to get these in our canner and we're going to can them for 75 minutes since they are pints. If I was using quarts, I would need to process them for 90 minutes, but they're pints. We're going to do it for 70 minutes. And I'm at about 2,500 elevation, and so I'm going to process them in for 15 pounds of pressure. So, all right, let's get these in the canner. Okay, here we are over at the canner. We're going to go ahead and get these jars down in here. See if you can see that. And I'm using the jar lifter. It would be much too hot and actually dangerous. I would risk burns if I were to try to put this in there with my hands. Perfect. So as you can see, what we have in there, the water is down below the rim of the jars, which is exactly where we want it. We don't want it to come up over the top. So the water is perfect. This is exactly where we want it. We're gonna go ahead and put the lid on and get this processing, and we're gonna go from there. Okay, I now have the lid down and sealed. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait until there is steam coming out of this little spout right here. And what that steam is doing is it's getting the air out of the pot, out of the canner. And that we want that because we don't want any air in there. We want the canner to be able to build up pressure. So we're just gonna wait for that steam to start coming out of there. That means that the canner is building up pressure, and then we'll put the weight on there, and then our time will begin once the weight is on there and the dial says 15, and then we will be on our way for timing, and it's again 75 minutes. All right, our canner has run at 75 minutes. We've also turned off the heat and let all the pressure out. So we can now take this off, and you'll see that there's no steam coming out of there. It's all good to go. And then let's get a couple of pot holders here. We're just gonna open our canner. There we go. It's pretty hot, so be real careful when you're taking the lid off that you don't get burned by that steam. All right, these look fantastic. And now the jars are ready to come out of the canner, and we're just gonna put them on this cooling rack with a towel on it. There will be a little bit of absorption from the water here. All right. And those beans are still bubbling. You can see some of the bubbles. So they're still cooking a little bit. They look great. And we're gonna put them on the towel and leave, that's quite a bit of bubbling going on there still. All right. We wanna make sure and leave some air space around the jars so that they can cool. And one thing to note is normally when I take jars out of the canner, there is a film of hard water on there since our water is hard. There is a film of hard water And there's not, so that vinegar trick worked. I put probably about a tablespoon of vinegar in the canning water, and it did help the jars to not get that hard water glaze on it. So this is just perfect. All right, over the next 24 hours, we'll be hearing that sweet sound of the popping of the lids as they seal completely. When they're completely sealed, I then like to write what it is on a piece of tape, and then I put it on that jar lid. I want to know that it's a black bean, or it's a kidney bean, or it's a pinto bean. So I do that also, and then I'm going to be using them quickly, so I don't generally put the date on there, but on things that I'm going to be canning long term, I do then also put the date on that piece of tape. All right, I think that's everything for today. I want to thank you so much for your time and watching this video, and please leave comments down below. Thank you so much.